KBGA Missoula, you are listening to Missing 中国. Today, our show features the language theme, uh, which is the seventh chemical element in the periodical chart, which is nitrogen. Of course, there won't be many songs with nitrogen in the title, so I changed it to the homophone in Chinese, 淡, which means light in flavor or like in color, that kind of light. Okay, so any movies that this word can remind you of, Mr. C?
Well, actually, now that you mention it, actually, it makes me think of the early 90s. There was a certain look to movies in the early 90s, a lot of movies. Whether the subject matter was light or not, the lighting was very high key lighting. I don't know why this happened, but you could even see it in the Robert Altman movie Shortcuts, which is based on Ray Carver stories, and Ray Carver stories are not very light by nature. But the lighting it's high key. Star Wars, the first Star Wars is a famous example of a movie that's lit high key, and it's flat. High key lighting is flat. And not every movie like that was in the early 90s looked like that. Not every early 90s movie was made like that, but an awful lot of them were. You can tell exactly what if a movie is from the early 90s because of this particular lighting. And the thing that changed it was the movie Seven, directed by, I forget his name now, David Fincher, excuse me. He changed all that. That movie brought back noir that had kind of been brought back by Blade Runner in the early 80s, but forgotten about somewhere in the 90s. And Seven brought it back. Now the dark lighting you see in movies all goes back to this revolution that Seven caused. But for the early 90s, the movies, whether the subject matter was lighthearted or not, the presentation was very light. You're welcome.
Very light. I don't know. And you said high key. Does that mean the light is very bright, or?
Yeah, it's very bright. The colors are bright, but the image is flat. So when you shoot more in a noir style, when you light things more the way film noir is lit, there's a lot more shadow on screen, and that separates objects. Whereas with the high key lighting, a great example, if you look at the first Star Wars movie, there's scenes where they're all in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, and it doesn't look like it just looks one-dimensional. It doesn't look three-dimensional.
I see. Like a low contrast?
I don't know what it has to do with contrast. It just has to do with high key lighting. There's not a lot of shadow employed.
Okay. Very interesting technology or technique in making movies, huh?
That's right.
Okay, but I also want to talk about those like less dramatic movies. I think that can be called light. Like it's like life. You don't see many dramatic things happening, but watching this movie can make you think of a lot of things, sometimes very profound.
Yes, well, the movie that when you first said that I thought of was Dazed and Confused, which actually is from the early 1990s, but most of that takes place at night, so the issue of high key lighting doesn't really apply. But to me, that's a light movie that just follows some teenagers on the last day of school in the 1970s. There is a story there, but it's very loose, and the plot itself is kind of a MacGuffin. It's not really as important as it's more of a social observation of teenagers, especially at that time. Teenagers really didn't have very many worries. And so it's a nice look into that time of life where you don't have to pay $8 a gallon for gas.
Okay. Thank you for all those talking, and I hope, audience, my dear friends, if you have something to say about it, just log on Spinitron and chat with us. Okay, enjoy the songs.